Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. My name is Rory and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. Varietal Literature is a group of writers in Vancouver. Just enjoy having narrative in our life, really, and having fun with it. On Thursdays at 6:30, we do a sort of a live writing fun thing, but what we do here are Tuesdays at 6:30, so we read fairy tales together. Now, if you're not watching this live, if you check down in the description below, there will be a place where a little timestamp so you can click on that will jump you to the stories, of which we are doing 3 stories. The first story that we're doing is called The Old Woman the Tramp, and it is about what the title of this video is about. It is about nail broth. The second one that we are going to read, though, is called Old Nick and something. Don't know why I can't remember the name right now. Hello, GS. And Old Nick is code for the devil. It's about a little girl and the devil. And the last one we're going to read is Death and the Doctor, which is, well, you'll see. It's the one we'll do last. The first 2 are going to come from a book called Fairytales from the Swedish by a collector named Björklo in 1859 or something like that. Late 19th century is where the book's from. And then the last book, the last one we're going to read is from an entirely different book called Tales from the Fjeld, which we've read from before. But all of these stories are stories that I found through this book called Nordic Tales. Here's the thing. We've been reading all the stories from this book since my birthday. I got it for my birthday. I've really enjoyed it. It has really beautiful illustrations. They're not paying me to do this or anything. I don't know. I like it. Here's the drawing for the one that we're going to read next. And GS says, well, you'd certainly get your iron for the day regarding the nail broth. It's a Swedish story, although I think I've heard it other places, but it's definitely a Swedish story. This book I discovered, sorry about any headphones users. I discovered this book is on Amazon, if you're curious about it. Please don't buy it from Amazon, buy it from literally anywhere else. But if you can't find it anywhere else, that's I found it there. And the reviews for it were so frustrating that I will talk about that in a moment, because I want to whine a bit. Remember, there's timestamps if this isn't live. You don't have to listen to me whine about Amazon reviews. But the reason I bring it up is this will be the last of the stories from this book. And all 3 of these stories come from the section of the book about wit. So it's sort of like outwitting or being witty or whatever. They're a little shorter. They're a little sillier than some of the stuff we've done. Also, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's showing through this way on your side, but for me, my camera is showing at a choppy frame rate, and unfortunately, there's really nothing I've been able to do with it in the time I had, so this video works as an audio, I'll say that. The reason why I didn't like the Amazon comments on that, there were several that annoyed me, but there was one in particular that annoyed me that said it could use another edit because it had extra vowels in some of the letters, and it was a little stilted and hard to read. And the extra vowels are almost certainly due to it being European spellings or straight up using Scandinavian spellings of words, which is appropriate, I think. Not a thing an editor would remove. The second reason is they're public domain stories. They're just being reprinted. They were originally collected in the 19th century. Anybody who read basically any part of the introduction or foreword knows that. And that's a part of the style. Like, why does it have to read? Anyways, I don't know. Not every book needs to read like a toddler's modern novel or book or something. It's a stylistically unique way of telling stories and whatever. It's Amazon reviews. What can you do? Okay, well, now that we've clearly gotten off track on the fairy tales, I guess we may as well get to it. We have 3 short stories about 3 witty encounters or outwitting of other things. And the first one, I think, is possibly one of the most famous ones. If you've never heard of it, that's fine. I hadn't really heard of it before, but I've discovered that it's fairly common through research. This particular version is called The Old Woman and the Tramp. So this is from Fairytales from the Swedish, by Björklö, and it's called The Old Woman and the Tramp. There was once a tramp who went plodding his way through a forest. The distance between the houses was so great that he had little hope of finding a shelter before the night set in. But all of a sudden he saw some lights between the trees. He then discovered a cottage where there was a fire burning on the hearth. How nice it would be to roast one's self before that fire and to get a bite of something, he thought. And so he dragged himself towards the cottage. Just then an old woman came toward him. "Good evening and well met," said the tramp. "Good evening," said the woman. "Where do you come from?" "South of the sun and east of the moon," said the tramp, "and now I am on the way home again. For I've been all over the world, with the exception of this parish," he said. "You must be a great traveler, then," said the woman. "What may your business be here?" "Oh, I want a shelter for the night," he said. "I thought as much," said the woman, "but you may as well get away from here at once, for my husband is not at home, and my place is not an inn," she said. "My good woman," said the tramp, "you must not be so cross and hard-hearted, for we are both human beings, and should help one another. It is written." "Help one another," said the woman. "Help? Did you ever hear of such a thing? Who'll help me, do you think? I haven't got a morsel in the house. No, you'll have to look for quarters elsewhere," she said. But the tramp was like the rest of his kind. He did not consider himself beaten at the first rebuff. Although the old woman grumbled and complained as much as she could, he was just as persistent as ever and went on begging and praying like a starved dog, until at last she gave in, and he got permission to lie on the floor for the night. That was very kind, he thought, and he thanked her for it. "Better on the floor without sleep than suffer cold in the forest deep," he said, for he was a merry fellow, this tramp, and was always ready with a rhyme. When he came into the room, he could see that the woman was not so badly off as she'd pretended, but she was a greedy and stingy woman of the worst sort, and was always complaining and grumbling. He now made himself very agreeable, of course, and asked her in his most insinuating manner for something to eat. "Where am I to get it from?" said the woman. "I haven't tasted a morsel myself the whole day." But the tramp was a cunning fellow, he was. "Poor old granny, you must be starving," he said. Well, I suppose I shall have to ask you to have something with me then." "Have something with you?" said the woman, and put it on the fire, and then he blew with all his might, till the fire was burning fiercely all around it. Then he took a 4-inch nail from his pocket, turned it 3 times in his hand, and put it into the pot. The woman stared with all her might. "What's this going to be?" she asked. "Nail broth," said the tramp, and began to stir the water with the porridge stick. "Nail broth?" asked the woman. "Yes, nail broth," said the tramp. The old woman had seen and heard a good deal in her time, but that anybody could have made broth with a nail, well, she'd never heard the like before. "That's something for people to know," she said. "That's something for poor people to know," she said, "and I should like to learn how to make it." "That which is not worth having will always go a-begging," said the tramp. But if she wanted to learn how to make it, she had only to watch him, he said, and he went on stirring the broth. Sorry, my stream did something questionable, so I just want to check something really good. Quickly, make sure I'm still live and on the air before I carry on. Yeah, it looks like we're still working. All right. That which is not worth having will always go a-begging, said the tramp. But if she wanted to learn how to make it, she had only to watch him, he said, and went on stirring the broth. The old woman squatted on the ground, her hands clasping her knees, and her eyes following his hand as he stirred both. Gia says, yes, you froze for a second. Oh, hopefully you guys didn't miss any of the story. This generally makes good broth, he said. But this time it will very likely be rather thin, for I've been making broth the whole week with the same nail. If only one had a handful of sifted oatmeal to put in, that would make it all right, he said. But what one has got to go without, it's no use thinking more about. And so he stirred the broth again. Well, I think I have a scrap of flour somewhere, said the old woman, and went out to fetch some. It was both good and fine. And there's a neat old sketchy picture of him stirring the broth. The tramp began putting flour into the broth and went on stirring while the woman sat staring at him, then at the pot until her eyes nearly burst their sockets. The broth would be good enough for company, he said, putting in one handful of flour after another. If I had only a bit of salted beef and a few potatoes to put in it, it would be good fit for gentlefolks. However particularly they might be, he said. But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking more about. When the old woman really began to think it over, she thought she had some potatoes and perhaps a bit of beef as well, and these she gave to the tramp, one who went on stirring, while she sat and stared as hard as ever. This will be grand enough for the best in the land, he said. Well, I never, said the woman, and just fancy, all with a nail. He was really wonderful. He was really a wonderful man, that tramp. He could do more than drink a sup and turn the tankard up, he could. If only I had a little barley and a drop of milk, we could ask the king himself to have some of it, he said. For this is what he has every blessed evening. That I know, for I've been in service under the king's cook, he said. Dear me, ask the king to have some? Well, I never, exclaimed the woman, slapping her knees. She was quite awestruck at the tramp and his grand connections. But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking more about, said the tramp. And then she remembered she had a little barley. And as for milk, well, she wasn't quite out of that. She said for her best cow had just calved, and then she went out to fetch both the one and the other. The tramp went on stirring, and the woman sat staring, one moment at him and the next at the pot. Then all at once the tramp took out the nail. Now it's ready, and now we'll have a real good feast, he said. But to this kind of soup the king and queen always take a dram or two. Liquor. And one sandwich at least. And then they always have a cloth on the table when they eat, he said. But what one has to go without, it's no use thinking more about. But by this time, the old woman herself had begun to feel quite grand and fine, I can tell you. And if that was all that was wanted to make it just as the king had it, she thought it'd be nice to have it just the same way for once, and play at being king and queen with the tramp. She went straight to the cupboard and brought out the brandy bottle, dram glasses, butter and cheese, smoked beef and veal, until at last the table looked as if it were decked out for the company. Never in her life had the old woman had such a grand feast, and never had she tasted such broth, and just fancy, made only with a nail. She was in such a good, merry humor, and having learnt such an economical way of making broth, that she did not know how to make enough of the tramp who had taught her such a useful thing. She was in such a good and merry humor, and having learnt such an economical way of making broth. Oh, I reread it. So they ate and drank and ate, till they became both tired and sleepy. The tramp was now going to lie down on the floor, but that would never do, thought the old woman. No, that was impossible. Such a grand person must have a bed to lie in, she said. He did not need much pressing. It's just like the sweet Christmas time, he said, and a nicer woman I've never came across. Ah, well, happy are they who meet with such good people, said he, and he lay down on the bed and went to sleep. And the next morning he woke, the first thing he got was coffee and a dram. And when he was going, the old woman gave him the bright dollar piece. "And thanks, many thanks, for what you have taught me," she said. "Now I shall live in comfort, since I have learned how to make broth with a nail." "Well, it isn't very difficult, if one only has something good to add to it," said the tramp as he went away. The woman stood staring after him. "Such people don't grow on every bush," she said. I think that story gives you a good feel for, like, what we're in for now. What I mean by wit. Sort of like outwitting or a little bit of corniness and, you know, stuff like that. Gia says, "Oh boy, this tramp is really working it." Yeah, he definitely got her, didn't he? Okay. Yeah, sorry if it froze there for a bit. I hope that it wasn't anything like crucial that you missed in the story, because I don't really know. I don't really know what this thing's ever doing, to be completely honest. There is like so many moving pieces involved in trying to do a stream. It's amazing that it works, and it probably doesn't help when if for every streamer is their own producer and technical advisor. So as long as we make it through and you've heard most of the stories, it's been a success. Okay. So I'm just going to have myself a drink of water and we will read our second story. Check one more thing. Apparently it was only 1 second, so that's good. Okay. This next story comes from the same book, Fairytales from the Swedish, by Durklo. And it's called Old Nick and the Girl. And going in, you should know, Old Nick is a name for the devil. There was once a girl who was so mad about dancing that she nearly went out of her mind whenever she heard a fiddle strike up. She was a very clever dancer, and a smarter girl to whirl around in a dance or kick her heels was not easily to be found, although she only had shoes made of birch bark and knitted leggings on her feet. Ooh, imagine dancing in that. She swept past at such a rate that the air whistled around her like a humming top. She might have whirled round still more quickly and lightly, of course, if she had leather shoes. But how was she to get them when she had no money to pay for them? For she was very poor, this girl, and could ill afford them. So one day, when the fair was being held at Amberg Heath, whom she should meet but old Nick. He was going to see the fun of the fair, as you may guess, for all sorts of tramps and vagabonds and watch dealers and rogues go there. I like the idea that a watch dealer is like the devil's business. And where such gentry are to be found, others of the same feather are sure to flock together. "What are you thinking about?" asked old Nick, who knew well enough how matters stood. "I'm wondering how I shall be able to get a pair of leather shoes to dance in," said the girl, "for I haven't any money to pay for them," she said. "Is that all?" "We'll soon get over that," said old Nick, and produced a pair of leather shoes, which he showed her. "Do you like these?" he asked. The girl stood staring at the shoes. She could never have believed that they were such fine, splendid shoes, for they were not common ones sewn with pitched thread, but real German shoes with welted soles, and looked as French as one could wish. "Is there spring in them as well?" she asked. "Yes, that you may be sure of," said old Nick. "Do you want them?" Yes, that she did. There could be no doubt about that, and so they began bargaining and higgling about the payment, till at last they came to terms. She was to have the shoes for a whole year for nothing, if only she would dance in his interest, and afterwards she should belong to him. She did not exactly make a good bargain, but Old Nick is not a person one can bargain with. But there was to be such spring in them that no human being would be able to swing round quicker in a dance or kick higher than she did, and if they did not satisfy her, he would take them back for nothing, and she would be free. With this they parted. And now the girl seemed to wake up thoroughly. She thought of nothing else but going to dances, wherever they might be, night after night. Well, she danced, and before she knew it, the year came to an end, and Old Nick came back and asked for his due. "They were a rubbishy pair of shoes you gave me," said the girl. "There was no spring in them at all," she said. "Wasn't there any spring in the shoes? Well, that's very strange," said Old Nick. "No, there wasn't," said the girl. "Why, my bark shoes are far better, and I can get on much faster in them than in these wretched things." "You twist about as if you were dancing," said Old Nick. "But now I think you will have to dance away with me after all." "Well, if you don't believe my words, I suppose you'll believe your eyes," she said. "Put on these grand shoes of yours and try them yourself," she said. "And I'll put on my bark shoes, and then we'll have a race so that you can see what they are good for," she said. Well, that was reasonable enough, he thought, and no doubt he felt there was very little danger in trying it. So they agreed to race to the end of Lake Fryken, which is in Sweden, and back, one on each side of the lake, which, as you know, is a very long one indeed. If she came in first, she was to be free, but if she came in last, she was to belong to him. But the girl had to run home, first of all, for she had a roll of cloth for the parson, which she must deliver before she tried her speed with Old Nick. Very well, that she might, for he went in fear of the parson. But the race should take place on the third day afterwards. Now, as bad luck would have it for Old Nick, it so happened that the girl had a sister, who was so like her that it was impossible to know one from the other, for they were twins, the two girls. But the sister was not mad about dancing, so Old Nick had not gotten scent of her. The girl now asked her sister to place herself at Frykstad, the south end of the lake, and she herself would take up a position at Fryksund, the north end of the lake. She had the bark shoes on, and Old Nick the leather ones, and so they set off, each on their side of the lake. The girl did not run very far, for she knew well enough how little running she need do. But Old Nick set off at full speed, much faster than one can ride on the railway. But when he came to Frykstad, he found the girl there already. And when he came back to Fryksund, she was there too. "Well, you see now," said the girl. There he is running. "Of course I see," said the old Nick, but he was not a man to give in at once. "One time is no time, that you know," he said. "Well, let's have another try," said the girl. Yes, that he would do, for the soles of his shoes were almost worn out, and then he knew what the state of the bark shoes would be in. They set off for the second time, and Old Nick ran so fast that the air whistled round the corners of the houses in Sand and Emtervik parishes. But when he came to Frykstad, the girl was already there, and when he got back to Fryksund, she was there before him this time also. "Can you see now who comes in first?" she said. "Yes, of course I can," said Old Nick, and began to dry the perspiration from his face, thinking all the time what a wonderful runner the girl must be. "But you know, twice is hardly half a time. It's the third time that counts." "Let's have another try then," said the girl. Yes, that he would do, for Old Nick is very sly, you know. For when the leather shoes were so torn to pieces that his feet were bleeding, he knew well enough what state the bark shoes would be in. And so they set off again. Old Nick went at a terrible speed. It was just like a regular northwester rushing past, for now he was furious. He rushed onwards so that the roofs were swept away and the fences creaked and groaned all the way through Son and Emtervik's parishes. But when he got to Frykstad, the girl was there, and when he got back to Friksund, she was there too. There he is, looking very tired. His feet were now in such a plight that the flesh hung in pieces from them, and he was so out of breath and groaned so hard that the sound echoed in the mountains. The girl almost pitied the old creature, disgusting as he was. "Do you see now," she said, "that there's a better spring in my bark shoes than in your leather ones? There's nothing left of yours, while mine will hold out for another run if you would like to try," she said. No. Old Nick had now to acknowledge himself beaten, and so she was free. "I've never seen the likes of such a woman," he said. "But if you go on dancing and jumping about like that all your days, we are sure to meet once more," he said. "Oh no," said the girl, and since then she's never danced again, for it is not every time that you can succeed in getting away from Old Nick. I like that the moral of the story is women shouldn't be dancing. Which is pretty fitting with the era, I think. Like, if anybody... There's like a good 1,000 years there where that was the basic thinking. You see elements of that in like Reefer Madness and stuff. GS says, haha, those shoes are shredded. Okay. So that is Old Nick and... I keep forgetting what is the full title. And the girl, that's why. It's so plain. I want to say like the maiden or something, but no, it's literally just Old Nick and the girl. Pardon me. Which brings us to our last story. Yeah, Gia says, don't dance, lol. Well, of course it was a trick. She tricked him with her twin. And, but he's saying that if she remains dancing, she's gonna fall into sin, and then the devil will get her anyways. Which is like some classic old world BS. I dance, by the way, and I think you should too. You do need shoes with some spring in them, though. Alright, which brings us to our last story, and with the story that will finish out our Nordic Tales book. And I think next week, by the way, I can't promise yet, because I gotta read a little bit and see if I can find something that works well, but I'm thinking of doing more from the Weird Tales of the Northern Sea, which was where Jack of Solom and the Gan Finn story was from, which I found in this book, but comes originally from that book. Just because it was so beautifully written, I think we could probably do more stories from that. Barring that, I may actually go back to Yeats and do some more Irish folktales, because I also have really wanted to read more of those. Anyways, we got ideas for the future. We've got stories coming. So you'll notice that this is called Karen's 3 Stories. We're just going to read one story from those 3. We've actually already read one of Karen's 3 stories. It's this weird structure in this particular book, Tales from the Fjeld, where somebody tells 3 stories to some kid that represents the audience that are wrapped around a theme. It's an odd way of collecting stories, to be honest. I don't really understand the purpose of it, but we obviously are not really going to... we're not going to read 3 separate little stories like this way. But the one that we read before also was in that book. It's called The Way of the World. That was the one about the snake tricking people, and then the fox tricks the snake. No, it was a dragon, I think it was. And then the fox gets his butt kicked. If you haven't seen it, it's in one of our shows in the last few weeks. I can't remember the title of it. They have a specific episode, but just watch them all. So this one's called Death and the Doctor. That's what we're actually reading, Death and the Doctor here. This one I think is probably the most grown up and witty, and I appreciate its message. So this is Death and the Doctor from Tales from the Fjeld, a second series of popular tales by Asbjornsen. Once on a time there was a lad who had lived as a servant a long time with a man of the north country. This man was a master at ale brewing, and it was so good, out of the way good, the like of it was not to be found. So when the lad was to leave his place, and the man was to pay him wages he had earned, he would take no other pay than a keg of Yule ale. Well, he got it, and set off with it, and he carried it both far and long. But the longer he carried the keg, the heavier it got. And so he began to look about to see if anyone were coming with whom he might have a drink, that the ale might lessen and the keg lighten. And after a long, long time he met an old man with a big beard. "Good day," said the man. "Good day to you," said the lad. "Whither away?" asked the man. "I'm looking after someone to drink with and get my keg lightened," said the lad. "Can't you drink as well with me as with anyone else?" said the man. "I have fared both far and wide, and I am both tired and thirsty." "Well, why shouldn't I?" said the lad. "But tell me, whence do you come, and what sort of man are you?" "I am our Lord, come from heaven," said the man. "Thee I will not drink with," said the lad, "for thou makest such distinction between persons here in the world, and sharest rights so unevenly that some get so rich and some get so poor. Nah, with thee I will not drink." And as he said this, he trotted off with his keg again. So when he had gone a bit farther, the keg grew too heavy again, and he thought he never could carry it any longer unless someone came with whom he might drink, and so lessen the ale in the keg. Yes, he met an ugly, scrawny man who came along fast and furious. "Good day," said the man. "Good day to you," said the lad. "Whither away?" said the man. "Oh, I'm looking for someone to drink with and get my keg lightened," said the lad. "Can't you drink with me as well as with anyone else?" said the man. "I have fared both far and wide. I am tired and thirsty." "Well, why not?" said the lad. "But who are you, and whence do you come?" "Who am I? I'm the devil. I come from hell. That's where I come from," said the man. "No," said the lad. "Thou only pinest and plaguest poor folk, and if there is any unhappiness astir, they always say it is thy fault. Thee I will not drink with." So he went far and farther, and then far again with his ale keg on his back, till he thought it grew so heavy that there was no carrying it any farther. He began to look round again if anyone were coming with whom he could drink and lighten his keg. So after a long time, another man came. He was so dry and lean 'twas a wonder his bones were strung together. "Good day," said the man. "Good day to you," said the lad. "Whither away?" asked the man. "Oh, I was only looking to see if I could find someone to drink with, that my keg might be lightened a little. It is so heavy to carry." "Can't you drink as well with me as with anyone else?" said the man. "Yes, why not?" asked the lad. "But what sort of man are you?" "They call me Death," said the man. "The very man for my money," asked the lad. "Thee I'm glad to drink with." And he said this, and he put down his keg, and began to tap the ale into a bowl. "Thou art an honest, trustworthy man, for thou treatest all alike, both rich and poor." So he drank his health, and Death drank his health, and Death said he had never tasted such drink, and as the lad was fond of him, they drank bowl and bowl about, till the ale was lessened and the keg grew light. At last Death said, I have never known a drink which smacked better, or did me so much good as this ale that you have given me, and I scarce know what to give you in return. But after he'd thought a while, he said the keg should never get empty, however much they drank out of it, and the ale that was in it should become a healing drink, by which the lad could make the sick whole again better than any doctor. And he also said that when the lad came into the sick man's room, Death would always be there, and show himself to him. And it should be to him for a sure token, if he saw Death at the foot of the bed, that he could cure the sick with a draught from the keg. But if he sat by the pillow, there was no healing nor medicine, for then the sick belonged to the dead. Well, the lad soon grew famous and was called in far and near, and he helped many to health again, who he'd been given over. And when he came in and saw how Death sat by the sick man's bed, he foretold either life or death, and his foretelling was never wrong. He got both a rich and powerful man, and at last he was called into a king's daughter, far, far away in the world. She was so dangerously ill, no doctor thought he could do her any good. And so they promised him all that he cared either to ask or have if he would only save her life. Now, when he came into the princess's room, there sat Death at her pillow. But as he sat, he dozed and nodded, and while he did, she felt herself better. Now, life or death is at stake, said the doctor, and I fear from what I see there is no hope. But they said he must save her, if it cost land and realm. So he looked at Death, and while he sat there and dozed again, he made a sign to the servants to turn the bed round so quickly that Death was left sitting at the foot, and at the very moment they turned the bed, the doctor gave her the draught, and her life was saved. Now you have cheated me, said Death, and we are quits. I was forced to do it, said the doctor, unless I wish to lose land and realm. That shan't help you much, said Death. Your time is up, for now you belong to me. Well, said the lad, what must be, must be. But you'll let me have time to read the Lord's Prayer first. Yes, he might have leave to do that. But he took very good care to not read the Lord's Prayer. Everything else he read, but the Lord's Prayer never crossed his lips, and at last, he thought he'd cheated Death for good and all. But when Death thought he had really waited too long, he went to the lad's house one night, hung up a great tablet with the Lord's Prayer painted on it over his bed. And when the lad woke in the morning and began to read the tablet, did not quite see what he was about until he came to Amen. But then it was just too late, and Death had him. And that is The Death and the Doctor, which is one that I particularly enjoyed, personally, which is why I put it last. Because as you know, in YouTube, the best thing to do is put all the best stuff at the end. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming by, GS, and talking to me in the chat. For those of you that are watching out in Lurking Land, thank you so much for coming by. I hope you guys enjoyed the stories tonight. Though we are done the Nordic Tales book, we are not done with fairy tales at all. And we also aren't done with shows this week. If you tune back in Thursday at 6:30 p.m., we'll do something a little silly, do some live writing. It's a lot of fun. It's very strange, so it's a hard sell, I understand, but I don't think you'll want to miss it. And as for myself, well, I appreciate all of you, and I will keep the fire stoked and warm. You guys have a good sleep. Thank you so much for coming by.